there to change people's beliefs. I'm just there to uplift what they believe and bring really like their dreams to the surface so that they can be more clear about the direction that they want to go in, whether it's growing a forest or building an agricultural field or cultivating the ocean, bringing back seaweed. It doesn't really matter. The goal is, I feel like my job at this point of my life is to support other people in their dreams, because that's my dream, is to support other people in their dreams. The best and easiest way to get Indigenous people to do this work is to provide food and laughter. That's how we keep going. And that can be said for all peoples. I span out all people enjoy laughing, enjoy food, and within that we create community.
Welcome everyone. Don't know what time of day it is wherever you are, but we are here starting a very, very wonderful, outstanding, and enjoyable episode of the Heartwood Podcast. I am your co-host, Dr. Thomas Rashard Easley, aka the Hip Hop Forester, aka I think the Cool Southerner. And of course, I'm always never doing this alone because we have my brothers and friends here with me. We have Mr. Bennett Olupo, who some I know, I'm sure you all are familiar with, but we also have a new friend with us, Mr. Isaac Carroo, who is going to be also leading with us this year and going into the next season. And so, brothers, if you want to say anything, please you can.
Yeah, I'll go for it quickly. This is Isaac, just really excited to be here and to be working on this project and to be starting my tenure with such an exciting episode.
Yeah, and I'm excited to be here too. I was able to see Dr. Kamelamela when she visited New Haven, but I didn't have the opportunity to talk to her. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to share with us.
Thank you. And on that note, we're going to read real quick the bio of our scholar, of our visitor, and more importantly, of our guest. Dr. Katie Kamelamela is an assistant professor at Arizona State University and researcher in the Global Discovery and Conservation Science Center, who studies ethnoecology, ecological restoration, indigenous conceptions of wealth, and indigenous economies. Her research focuses on historical and contemporary Native Hawaiian forest plant gathering places and continues to expand policy that includes community input within forest restoration management. And Dr. Kamelamela, I'm so happy that you're here with us today. Thank you, obviously, for doing a great lecture there at Yale University and then coming and joining us here. And so welcome to the Heartwood Podcast.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Thanks for your time. Thank you for the invitation. And it's fun to extend my time with connections at Yale.
Well, thank you, and you have the questions in front, and I have them here. So we're going to just go ahead and we'll dive in. As I mentioned, I'm speaking to you. I'm visiting here with you from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I've been here about 20 years now. And it is wonderful to be here, but I come from Birmingham, Alabama. And so I was born and raised there. It's known as the birthplace of the civil rights movement. My family are all civil rights activists. And so I was brought up learning about that movement, and I still take that lens with me everywhere I go. And when I connect with people and learn from them. And so that was just my way of saying whatever I ask, I like to share. So what I'd like to ask you then is, can you share with us where you come from ancestrally and as well as your personal upbringing, please?
Yeah, I'm born and raised on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, which is north of the middle of the Pacific. I moved around when I lived on Oahu. Oahu is where our capital city is, Honolulu. I lived on the kind of west side of the island, so the drier side of the island, and spent most of my time near Pearl Harbor. What's called Aiea or Waimalu is the smaller area, and then I attended the University of Hawaii at Manoa for probably just the same amount of time that I was in primary and secondary school. So a lot of my experiences are on that island, and I currently am sharing time with you all coming from Hawaii Island in Hilo, the Big Island, as it's also known as, where the volcano is at. And yeah, my upbringing was in the city, so I call myself an urban Hawaiian, and now I live in the cloud forest in the country. So sometimes we talk about the transitions of people going from country to city, but my transition still today is going from city to country and making those adaptations. And I moved out here to be closer to forests. I live in a forest now, and understand more closely the the research I've been previously doing about forest gathering practices in Hawaii, as it's connected to cultural and economic foundations of the islands.
Okay, city to country. Okay, so I growing up in Birmingham, that's the biggest city in the state of Alabama. Okay. But I was raised with my grandparents, and my grandparents taught me gardening. And so it felt, I didn't understand it as a kid, but as an adult now who grows my own food now, it was wonderful to be there. And I'm saying, I'm hungry, Grandma. And then she says, well, go out there and pick something. And then, I would go outside and they grew greens, cabbage. They actually grew cauliflower, but they had so much. And of course, I still, miss my grandparents, but that for me was my entry into what I would consider forestry. That was, whereas, of course, my grandparents never said the word environment, may they rest in power, but they understood the land and they understood where we were. So with that, I'd like to ask you, Doctor, what brought you to a career of studying in the environment and also in particular in an academic setting?
Yeah, so from a young age, what is it? I probably started at like, there's gonna be a twist here. So at like the age of 8, I started playing volleyball, and that was my job until I was like 18, 19 years old. The whole thing was to get a 4-year full ride. I didn't know why I was going to school, and then things turned, and I ended up leaving where I got the 4-year scholarship, and I ended up moving back home, and I took a class called Ethnobotany, Introduction to Ethnobotany. And I mainly took it because I didn't know what it was. And so I also was taking some introduction to Hawaii courses at the Hawaiian Studies Department. And it was just really easy for me, those classes. I looked around and the exercises we were doing, people were having really hard times with it. And I was like, why is this hard? But it was because I was raised in Hawaii, and I, you know, had an affinity for studying things Hawaii, being Hawaiian, being Native Hawaiian. And so I just kind of rolled with it. I ended up finding mentors. I didn't know that they were called that. They, directed me to go to an internship program for the summer. I got into that internship program. It ended up being 4 years instead of 8 weeks. And from there, that was doing water quality with the State Department of Health and the U.S. Geological Survey. And we'd go into the mountains and take water samples, and I would see people in the forest while we were there. And I'm like an urban kid, right? I'm like, why are they up here? Like, what's going on? So I ended up getting tapped by an elder. I am part of a group called the Protect Ho'olawio Ohana, who historically helped to stop the bombing from the Navy, who were bombing an island for 50 years for practice. And so we were on a ceremonial walk, and one of these elders asked me to teach water quality at their school in Hakipu'u. It's called Hakipu'u Learning Center. So I ended up being adopted by that uncle, helping out these students doing water quality. And these people live that life in the country, which I didn't know about. They would do underground ovens, which we call emus, which I ended up doing for my master's project. studying or looking at what resources for wood and to make steam and for food people would gather and share with each other. And then that rolled into looking at, oh, if this is what people do for emo or underground oven, like what is the larger interest? So I told my advisor, my dream project was like, oh, I want to look at gathering practices across the state. And then less than a year later, the state and the federal, the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, which is in the Department of Land and Natural Resources in Hawaii, as well as the U.S. Forest Service, asked my advisor to do that exact project. So she handed it over to me. And at that point, I had already been doing different, what people would call like Hawaiian crafts, weaving. I was doing art. A lot of those activities are the basis of cultural foundations. I was really active in volunteering with different Native Hawaiian organizations like traditional sailing, traditional navigation, cleaning land, planting food and forest products. So I already was part of these communities. And so I would just go talk story with people. And what I learned is I had kind of a knack for talking story. So, and I learned that through contrast with my advisors. My advisors would have issues talking to elders, Native Hawaiian elders. And I was like, yo, like, can I like do this for 5 minutes? And then we would be able to engage in the information we're interested in, which is like forest gathering practices. So it's kind of serendipitous. In that ethnobotany introduction class, there was a teacher I was really inspired by, mostly by her kindness, Dr. Tamara Tickton. So as an undergraduate, you can get jobs at the university, and there's like a website. And I knew that she had field sites out in the country where we would collect seeds, measure and remove invasive species, plants. So I waited like a year or two for a job to come up with her. And then I ended up working with her for 2 years. And on my last semester of school in undergrad, she's like, you ever thought of grad school? And I was like, what's grad school? She's like, oh, you go to school after school. And I was like, why would you do that? Like, why would you go to school after you got your degree? Like, that makes no sense to me. She's like, well, I have this class with graduate students. You should like come. And then I went and I was like, this is weird. Like, why would you, who goes to school after school? Like, we just did that. We just went to college after high school. Like, why would you go to more college? Like, what are you doing? But her class was called Introduction to Ethnoecology. And ethnoecology is the study of relationships between people and their environment. So there was this one paper, and I usually talk about it because it was the paper that changed like my life, basically. And it was about a community who was collecting palm thatch. And the study was comparing when they would gather thatch during different moon phases. And what they found out was that when they collected palms for thatch during full moons, those leaves would last 2 to 3 times longer than palms that were collected during other cycles of the moon. And when they investigated that further, they learned that because of the light of the moon, there would be more herbivory, more insects eating the leaves. And so the plants released like an enzyme to repel insects, which makes them more hardier. But traditionally, the people would collect those leaves during the full moons. But then they're able to make that connection on how and why those leaves work that way. And so after that, I was like, that's cool. I want to do that. So my PhD ended up doing, I didn't do any chemical analysis, but I did a general assessment of forest gathering practices throughout Hawaii with the state. We just published, or the report that I worked on years ago just got published in 2023. And so we recorded about 140 plants currently being gathered from the forest. as an update to previous studies that were done in like the 80s and the 70s that were published in the 90s. So historically, a lot of the focus about Hawaiian lifeways and lifestyles focused on native plants, but now through obviously degradation of forest resources, introduction of new species, the culture is adapting. And it's important to show those substitutions that help support cultural lifeways and ceremonies, as well as highlight those native species that are still integral to kind of to our belief systems and how we communicate with each other and show appreciation. So yeah, that's the whole thing. That's like my little bit about how I got into academia. And yeah, I read a lot. A lot of people don't like reading, but it's kind of my jam. Kind of do it a lot. It's good fun. And so I just found the fun in all of the things that I did for school. Even if I wasn't the best at it, I adapted it so that it was interesting to me, and get the assignment done. But yeah, I just kind of pick things that are fun. It's really counterintuitive in what they tell you, but I didn't really listen to the advice people told me, because I was like, that's cool, it works for you. And just leave it at that. And do what works for me. And that's kind of what that's what I tell my students to do, is pursue what interests you. And it doesn't matter what other people think, as long as you're inspired by the work that you're doing. You're the only person that has to cruise with you 24/7. So might as well make that person happy.
Thank you. I'm gonna jump in real quick. This reminds me a lot of the interests I have related to Yoruba culture. Because a lot of times, like in my culture, they talk about, or you hear about, just stories related to herbs, related to practices. Ethnobotany is tied into the spirituality, and like when they pick the plants, like what you're saying, to do certain herbal practices for healing, has a big impact on the efficacy of the plant. And they keep talking about that over and over. So I guess the question for you is, how do you tie in like stories related to that we may not often see in Western sciences,
Yeah, the stories are important, and there's different stories. There's historical stories that have been written down that people have access to widely and publicly. And then there's stories that are passed down through families that aren't written down, so they're not known as widely. And then we have our own personal experiences, which could be a mishmash of those two, including our own. But what really is important is when we pass on, or when people feel comfortable passing on that information, that we're able to adapt that. Plants are different depending where they're grown. So nutrients, environment, hardiness. And so adapting that plant, like it's a personality, right? It's been shaped, there's nature around it that gives it its personality, and then the nurture from the land, which is the nutrients. And so we need to be adaptable in that. And so allow those stories to be malleable and change, because the stories that we're told come from the experiences of other people and stories that they've been told. So it changes every time. Like, it depends on who's telling the story. You want to make sure that they have experience with the plant, or with the process, or with the outcome you're searching for. If you're able to do that process with them. But most of those stories, and they can be like, what do they call them? I can know Ololo no Eao, which are short sayings that give us the lesson. Those are also being adapted due to climate. And we need to be aware that these are guiding stories, and when we apply them to our lives, to also be aware of their impacts on us. Is it the result that we're looking for? Is the result changing? Why is it that way? And so to be cognizant and aware of how we're applying that story, and are we getting the result? Is that still true? So not just taking things by face value, but using them as a guiding resource. And I think that's different from, I guess, Western traditional stories of universal truths, because they're place-based, they're community-based, their cultural context to those understandings versus wide casting of landscape knowledge. And so understanding where that information is coming from is critical for everybody, especially the person who's being treated. So I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, what you were saying about harvesting by the moon really struck a chord with me as well, just because I've seen it in a couple places I've been, and just over the holidays, when I was back in Jamaica, I heard somebody talking the same thing, saying that it's best to harvest timber on full moons, and I never knew why, but it was about insects as well. But you've really just opened up some insight for me. But also there was an element of there was a human component to it as well, saying, you know, when you're doing those intensive activities, time it up with the full moon when it's going to energize you as well.
Yeah, the moon has a lot of, it's constant in our life, whether we look at it or see it or pay attention. And so it is important to understand your moon phases from the places that you're at. Like we have a Hawaiian moon calendar here. And even though we may be looking at the moon at the same time, its position will be different depending on our location, and that'll influence what's going on around us. So yeah, it'd be kind of fun to see if like Jamaica has a moon calendar tradition. I know that there's a movement in the Pacific and with indigenous peoples on Turtle Island and Alaska and New Zealand to connect those ideals. So that might be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It was huge when I was over in Aotearoa as well. I was lucky enough to know an elder named Rereata Makiha, and he's kind of the moon guy across the whole Motu. So that really opened my eyes up to a lot.
Actually, if you would describe something for us, you mentioned going from the city to the country. As a forester, I remember when I first started learning about forests, it's like the terms that they used weren't the way that my grandfather spoke. You know, like they would say the trees weren't competition with each other. My grandfather would say that those trees are our relatives, actually. You know, they would say that there's nothing in the understory, but my grandfather would be like, oh, you know, if I boil that and you drink it, it'll make you feel better, you know. And so I didn't, so it didn't make sense to say that the understory was, you know, like worthless and you know, and all of that. And so I just love to, you know, just hear that from you. Like how would you describe? I'm going to say describe. I don't want to say define because you know, I don't want to kind of put those kind of parameters on it. But how would you describe the forest that you dwell in or live in?
Oh, it's a cloud forest, it's a cold forest. Obviously, there was a lot of land change before we got there. There's been a lot of economic activities that have impacted our forest in Hawaii, and where we live is one of those areas. Cattle ranching, there was previous felling of, there's the gold rush in California in 1949. And so Hawaii supplied bedding and pillows from ferns. And so that's where we live. The subdivision near us is called Fern Forest. There's a lot of ferns where we live, but there's also some remnant like ohia trees, which is our native trees, but most of it is introduced at this point, and it's very thick. It's very wild. There are like lava tube holes in the forest, so you need to be careful when you're walking around. One of our dogs just got caught in one in the forest, so we had to go get him. So it can be, I don't want to use the word dangerous, if you don't pay attention, there are hazards. If you don't provide respect, you could be harmed. It's very cold where we're at. You can see like I'm wearing like warm clothes. It's not for the AC. I just came in from home. It's always raining. It's raining often. So when people are like, "Oh, I wish, I could be where you're at in Hawaii," I'm like, "Do you? Do you want to be at 2,200 feet in a cloud forest, which has mist constantly? Is that where you think, I know you don't think that that's where I'm at, but that's where I live." So it's very much a cold environment, which people don't really think of Hawaii. We do have snow in Hawaii, so it gets cold. Sometimes there's snow in the summer on the mountains, some snow frost on the mountains. But it's pretty quiet comparatively to the city, and I like it. I live in a cloud forest. I feel very grateful to be in an area that has water. Usually in many of the areas, like I live in Puna, the area is called Puna, which means spring, actually was one of the names. But most people, because it's where the lava flows are, don't have any dirt, but our land has dirt. So we're very rich to have dirt. That sounds crazy, but most people just have lava rock. Um, some of my friends have like lava caverns under their home. So yeah, so the topography, the geography of the island is very fresh and young. And so to have soil is really like a blessing to be able to grow things or not bring in fertilizers and stuff like that, or literally dirt to grow things. Probably not the description you're looking for, but that's where we're at. And it's just a different way of living.
Yeah,
We're not
yeah.
on county water, we're on
Mhm.
catchment. You know, our house just got internet like 5 years ago. So our internet is still pretty spotty out there. So I come into town to do things like this. So there's better streaming. So yeah, it's not all of the conveniences that I had growing up in the city for sure. It's been a hardcore adaptation. But my partner is from that land. He's lived on that land over 25 years. So I listen to him about what needs to be done. He can like read the wind and the rain, and there's a lot of preparation to be done. And I'm not familiar with that. So I just take cues from him and, be humble in where we live, humble to the elements.
Thank you. No, I wasn't looking for a particular answer. I just wanted to just listen and learn because I think that many people probably only have one idea what a forest is in their mind. Some people don't even know what a forest is. I know in my family, when I studied forestry, they didn't know what that was, even though I was an Eagle Scout. I'm a Boy Scout, and I would be going out in the woods, if you will. But then the more that I learned about forest and how land was converted over time, I'm like, oh, we're living in one actually. We just don't call it that, because we don't see it. Now we're using terms like green space and all of that. But if we were to go back century or just say a century ago, at least like where I'm from, there were a lot of trees there in Birmingham, Alabama. And here in Raleigh, we now say microforest, so now it's like so many small forests are being cut, so that like they're putting everything into a category. But I just wanted to hear how you would describe, and thank you, for that. How does your personal background and your culture inform the way you work? And I'll just add a piece like, how do you bring your personal identities into your working relationships and the projects that you choose to take on? And how does the connection of I know I'm probably not gonna say this right, of the Aina into your culture translate into your personal life?
Yeah, so super personal. Growing up, my mom was sick most of the time. Like I said, I started playing volleyball when I was like 8 years old. that's about the time my mom started going to dialysis. She had polycystic kidneys. And so when I was in 6th grade, she got her kidney transplant. And so that really influenced how she ate and therefore how I ate. And there was this one point where sweet potato is a traditional food in Hawaii, especially for Hawaiians. And her doctor told her that she couldn't eat sweet potato anymore because of like her diabetes, and she started crying. Um, and so a lot of the work that I do is driven not by the sadness of that, but of like the happiness and the glimmers of when I interviewed my family about what they would do in their kids and what kind of foods they would gather. And so that's kind of what keeps me going in my work, is connecting with people who have like that sparkle in them when they talk about traditional foods, traditional practices, and how I can support those life ways. Usually or historically, I would, and it's mostly my practice, is I don't go into communities that I'm not invited into, which is different. And people are like, how do you get work? And I'm like, well, there's a lot of different communities out there that want support in different ways. And I only want to provide my time if they feel it's valuable and if it can contribute to their goals and what they're looking to achieve. So between my direct family experiences, growing up, I was really interested in Hawaiian lifeways. I used to say to my mom, like, I'm gonna worship Hawaiian gods when I grow up. And that came true and became part of my life, is part of my life. And I bring that along with me as well. The most important thing I feel I provide is space for people to be who they are, to hold onto their beliefs and to, for sure, not push my beliefs onto other people and allow them to be. I think that's really valuable in this time of our lives, or this lifetime. And so if people have a view that in a scientific way this plant would be like introduced to Hawaii. But if a community views that plant as native to their culture, I will not correct them. I will write my report in a way that includes their beliefs. I'm not there to change people's beliefs. I'm just there to uplift what they believe, and bring really like their dreams to the surface, so that they can be more clear about the direction that they want to go in, whether it's growing a forest or building an agricultural field, or cultivating the ocean, bringing back seaweed. It doesn't really matter. The goal is, I feel like my job at this point of my life is to support other people in their dreams, because that's my dream, is to support other people in their dreams. So that helps to sustain me, helps to keep me going in the way that a lot of stories around Indigenous peoples amplify sadness. But within all that sadness, there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of singing. There's a lot of celebration of life, even during death. And that is really lost within, or not seen. I'm not going to say lost. It's not seen by many people because they choose not to engage, either because they feel like they don't belong or it's not for them, or what other people believe, which may or may not be true. What's essential is the best and easiest way to get Indigenous people to do this work is to provide food and laughter. That's how we keep going. And that can be said for all peoples. I'd span out all people enjoy laughing, enjoy food, and within that we create community. So actually one of my classes this semester is called The Foundations of Science, Kindness, and Community. And so our midterm project is making a cookbook. So everyone has something they can bring to the party. And then the final project is a genealogy project, either about your family or your scientific background. So when you go to the party, you got a story and you know who you are. And I really have seen within the science and even indigenous communities, the communities that I work with, a lack of, or not a lack, a want to belong, and understanding that, and sharing the understanding that belonging doesn't mean not being who you are, it means leaning into who you are and allowing people to see you for who you are. So if you're vegetarian, don't bring meat-filled buns to the party. Bring, your vegetarian dish so people can experience your culture and who you are. Don't placate other people or feel like you won't belong because you're vegetarian. I'm just using that as an example. But I've seen people do that and not have any food at the party that they could eat. But I was thinking about those people, so I made them a dish so they could eat. So yeah, it's about helping people or supporting people where they're at and allowing them space to lean into who they are as individuals and as community. That's what I really believe my larger work is about. And that I feel like that's fulfilling for me.
Everything that you just said about vegetarians was fulfilling for me, because for 24 years, that's been my reality, where I go places and people don't have food for me to eat. But I've done what you did, whereas I bring my own food, and I say, oh no, I brought enough to share. And so when I bring it and then they start eating it, of course, some people want to quickly convert too, oh, you eating? I'm like, stick to your meat. You're not taking my food. So that's one thing I wanted to say. Have you been enjoying the episodes of the Heartwood Podcast? Do you like the topics that we discuss? If you are interested in going deeper, we encourage you to get the book written by our own Dr. Thomas Rashard Easley, Mind, Heart for Diversity. And you can purchase the book from our website, mindheartfordiversity.com. Thank you. Another thing, Doc, that you shared made me think about something. Recently, I was working with a conservation district up in Michigan. And there's basically a black side and there's a white side. And the white side is where the conservation work's being done, and the black folk are not necessarily a part of it. Well, something just recently happened where they were getting ready to tell the black people that they need to remove this invasive species, until they recently found out. They were like, well, this invasive species is what came over with our ancestors. And we've been using this. And I don't recall what it is, but I'm just giving you the essence of it.
Yeah.
But we've been using this for our culture for all of this time, and they're getting ready to redo the Underground Railroad. And it was, I guess, for me, comforting to see the folks who run the district to go, oh, we didn't know that, like they didn't know the history. I didn't either. I mean, I was brought in to listen and to help. I didn't, I'm there as a visitor. I'm invited. And to see that they had to have a different discussion about how to define this invasive species now that they have this other information about how this part of the community actually utilizes this plant. And so I'd like to just ask if you could just, and I'm gonna say speak to that, because I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but like the way that you said how you make space for people. Your dream, hold on, I wrote it down, is to help, oh shucks, hold on, support other people in their dreams. Okay. And so I just want, and how people want to belong, it's just belonging is being who you are. So it's so many quotables and mic drop moments that you're giving us, but I just wanted to ask if you could just, maybe could you just elaborate on just like what I just shared, and what would be a good way, I'll ask it like this, what would be a good way for folks who are in conservation to engage in a situation like that?
Yeah, I think being part of the community is how you engage. We have a similar example that I use for my underground oven project, where Kiave, or widely known as mesquite, in like the Arizona Southwest area, South America, is seen as invasive species within the conservation community. But within the communities that I surveyed, who use that plant as a substitution for native hardwoods because of access and limitation, like 90% of the people say that they prefer that wood that seems invasive. and they're concerned that it is going to be diminished over time and they want to replant. So that's like a clear bucking of beliefs between conservation communities, and mostly Native Hawaiian communities do that practice, or Polynesian communities, other Polynesian peoples do that in Hawaii as well. And so it's really interesting, like you want to come to the party and eat the food, but you want to take away the wood that's cooking the food. So it's more of bringing in an understanding through practice and making them aware of like, what are they asking people to do? What are they asking people to forego? There are other woods, I think recorded like 20 different woods, but if 90% of the people are preferring that wood out of 20, then there's a clear need for that resource, and people are willing to pay for it to come in. So this is a weird idea, but two truths can be true at the same time. People can view it as invasive, as a resource that is tapping the aquifer and reducing water resources. And it can be an integral substitute resource for a social fabric event, like, that wood is used to cook food for marriages, graduations, birthdays, first birthdays, anniversaries, visitations. It's used to entertain tourists. It has a lot of cultural and economic value. And I think that it would be fair to be like, well, you need to find another substitution if you really believe it. And, there's some colleagues that have very staunch views about Kiave in my community. And I wonder sometimes when I hear, sometimes it's like a very violent tone, aggressive, I go beyond assertive, it's very aggressive, of how would you feel if someone talked about your beliefs in that way? Like, how would you feel? Is that a way that you would want to be talked to about your beliefs? And how would you react to somebody that spoke to you in that manner about your beliefs? What would your reaction be? Why would you expect anybody else to act differently than what you would do in that situation? Or if you do act differently, how are you able to get there? How are you able to bridge those emotions and those reactions with calmness or acceptance? So when you talk about engaging or disengaging resources from cultural practices, it really picks at people's self-identity and how they view the world and perspectives. It's very intimate. So conservationists have a self-identity that's wrapped in saving nature. A lot of communities that do the practice I talked about are wrapped up in an identity of, this is how I feed my community. This is how we gather as a people. This is how we grow our social fabric. So is there going to be a union of those? I'm not sure, but I do know that conservationists do eat from those pits. So I think that needs to be an awareness when we want to advocate for the demise of something, is where we participating in that practice, we're also benefiting from that practice.
That perspective to me makes me think about an oversimplification. It's like the platinum rule and the golden rule, right? You treat people like you want to be treated. You treat people like they want to be treated. And the only way you can do the platinum rule is if you know something about them or have a relationship. And it just seems like whether we're talking about natural resources or even economics or something, it seems like a lot of things are always like one way. and I think it's powerful that you make it this two-way bilateral, like, you make sure that it's coming both ways. How do you feel? And I think that's what I hope people who are listening, it seems like that if we can, for me, that's one of the places to get people to that maybe helps them, because at least in the engagements I have, it's not until it becomes personal for people that it's like the seed starts to germinate, and and the tough part is just how long it takes for the seed to germinate. But I think it's powerful the way that you described it. And I've I have a part, it's on here a personal, but I kind of just want to ask one more question on your profession before before I go to personal, which is, what is the tie you see between ethnoecology, culture, and economic systems?
Yeah, they're all the same thing. So for people who aren't familiar, again, ethnoecology is the study of people and their relationships with the environment. It's not the study of people, it's not the study of the environment, it's the study of the relationships. And so they're ingrained in each other. Within my studies, I identify that resources that are culturally important are also market viable. And the ones that are the most valuable are the ones that have the highest cultural value. So it's not just people from the outside that are purchasing, it's people within the culture who don't know how to do the practice, don't have access, are in the cities mostly, who are purchasing these resources. So it's just like everyone eats chicken nuggets and French fries, but nobody knows where the chicken is raised or where the potato comes from. It's the same thing when it comes to the purchasing of cultural resources. A lot of people know where to buy it, but they don't know how it's processed or where it comes from and how they contribute to those practices. Um, I'm not against monetary what is it? I'm not against people making money off of their practices. I just want to advocate for people who want those practices to continue and who benefit from those practices to understand the work that goes into it so they can have more appreciation. The An example here would be like maile, which is a lei. If you see any wedding photos from Hawaii, there's usually a man and he has like a vine around his neck, and that's a maile lei, and it's the only native species that's sold on the market year round to the public. And the largest consumers of maile is actually like the tourism industry. And whatever else is not reserved goes to public sale. And the amounts for maile, like I just bought one, and that one was like $55 for a triple strand. And the prices are increasing, but the amount of work that it takes to go to the forest, not even just go to the forest, to cultivate, to curate that plant so that it can be prepared for harvesting, to ensure that people who don't know what they're doing don't go after your patches, to observe and make sure that those resources are still there, is worth more than $55. It's worth more because of the experience that it imparts within our communities and our families to commemorate events. So for me, ethnoecology, culture, and economics is intrinsically intertwined with one another. It's important, and I understand that people get very, the word is sensitive that comes to me right now when you talk about selling cultural resources. But it's very rare that people have never bought a cultural resource before, especially in these times. If you're not the practitioner, you are purchasing them for their cultural value. Whether you're paying them in smoked meat or cleaning their yard or in actual money, there's an exchange of energy happening there to show appreciation for what you are receiving. And that's the important part, is that that energy exchange is equal, or there's equity within that energy exchange. So the more that we talk about those connections, the more we can advocate for their curation and management in wild spaces, in spaces that people hardly go to, and provide support to the families and to the individuals who allow us to bring, as one of my teachers would say, like the scent of the forest down, like bringing the forest to the city, bringing the forest to where we're at. It really is like the spice of our culture. It's what makes it valuable. It's why we value it.
Spice of our culture. Like I said, too many quotables. It's so many. The work that you do, well, yeah, I think you've told us what brings you joy or what fulfills your dreams is helping other people to get to their dreams. But I assume, I hope it's a safe assumption that sometimes the work that you do can be maybe depleting, depending on who you're talking, maybe working with, because I know you love your work. So, but Doc, it'd be great to know, how does a scholar such as yourself, who has written great work, who's been on public view too, I saw, how do you replenish yourself though? Like, just as you just mentioned, the energy is equal. And some people don't even understand what it means to purchase a cultural resource, let alone, to actually value it. And you do. But, when you get home or get back to the cloud forest or, whatever, like, how do you replenish you?
I think it's just being present and practicing being present, like with you all right now. And the more present I become in my work and at home, the more I can appreciate the time I have with the people that I'm spending with them, whether it's my students or my colleagues, my partner, my puppies. Puppies are very important. And then I have new hobbies now. So I've been doing a lot of Hawaiian crafts for a while, and nothing's really stuck, but I feel like I found a path that I'm going to be sticking with into my old auntie phase. So I'm very excited for the next 40 years, for the creations I'll be making and sharing with people, so I can show my gratitude for what they've given me, in a small piece. So that's kind of what I do. I really focus on not what makes me, I feel like I said, like, not what makes me happy, but like what keeps me present and full of gratitude. I feel very blessed, with health, with love, with friendships, with experiences. And, I do a lot of traveling. People would say that that's really awesome. But I really just view a plane like, a school bus. It just takes me to work so that I can go share the good word and share the stories of what's going on. So it's important for me just to be present where I'm at, whether, I'm in New Haven or DC or Hilo or Dubai or wherever I'm at, to be where I'm at, because I'll never know if I'll be back there or here. So being present is probably the most active practice that I have. So when I'm drinking tea, I'm drinking tea. When I'm writing emails, I'm writing emails. When I'm at the doctor, I'm at the doctor. And to not be in the future or in the past, but just be grateful for the present that I have, to be present.
Yeah, two more questions, limit at the time. But I do feel like what you just said led into them, because you took us from the personal, and I think this personal then takes us back out into the global. And so that is about, how has your experience been representing your work and your home on the mainland or even in international events like COP? And how do you navigate these spaces that are intense in the context of governance and negotiations?
Yeah, I don't know if this happens in other communities, but I have been a part of and seen that as Native Hawaiians, we groom our children to be ambassadors of our nation and of our people from a very young age. So it's just part of who I am. I feel like it's just part of who we are as community members. Not everyone takes up that responsibility, but I took it very seriously growing up. When I go away, I know I'm a representation of not just my family, not just of my ohana, but of my community of Native Hawaiians. If I act a fool, they look a fool. If I act representable, then they're very well represented and people will be interested in our causes and advocacy. And so I feel it's very easy for me to do that because that's how I was raised from a young age, starting traveling like when I was 12 by myself, to represent our communities in different ways. So um, yeah, it's just part of who I am, and I think a part of who we are as Native Hawaiians is to represent our island home the best we can, with humility and kindness and aloha, and bring that to places that may have less warmer climates, and not really experience that type of warmth.
Um, so I do a lot of work in like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I find that when I'll go into a lot of, whether it's academic, corporate, or whatever spaces, that there's always some people who resist,
Mm-hmm.
like learning, and not just say learning new things. And it seems like the people who embrace that, to me, they do, but like they kind of see themselves as like emissaries, or like representatives of their community. So it's like it's almost like they understand that it's like their job in that moment is really to represent their people of their community and to be curious about who it is that they're engaging with. And it seems like if they're representing, that keeps me where I need to be. But if I'm curious about you, it keeps me coming to you in a certain way. And if we're doing it together, the only thing we can do is grow together and actually enrich each other. And it just seems like I appreciate everything that you said, but as you said, it's obvious that there's certain pockets of many communities where that doesn't happen. It's like where people are not brought up to see themselves. Basically, what I feel, what I'm taking from you is that I'm actually connected to everyone. So I have to be mindful of the impact that I'm having. Thank goodness my grandmama and granddad smack in the back of the head keeps me humble, so I don't have to worry about that. But they always, like they reminded me, just like you're not better than anyone, then they put the other thing, but no one's better than you. And so you have to be open to them. And your words made me think about my ancestors and think about my family upbringing and the beautiful parts of it. And so I thank you for that. And just have this, well, at least on this paper, one last question, but in case my brothers have something else, hey, we all here, right? And that is, uh, how does climate change impact the way you do your work as Kanaka?
Yeah, I think when working with communities or with government agencies, we'll go with interesting as the word. Um, Really, my work is practice and place-based. So taking cues from people of those places on how they feel they need to prepare. And when it comes to government agencies, what I see myself more doing is there's a lot of, what is it? There's like a lot of fear within the environmental community about climate change. But I need to remember about how our ancestors dealt with those changes um, in their time with less economic and physical, tangible resources. And what they did was they focused on what they wanted. They didn't talk about what they didn't want. They focused and created chants about what they wanted to see, how they wanted to see it, and they would create like a play of how that would happen, of how the rains would come, of how they would prepare for their food to grow. And I think make ready is kind of a term we have here. I'm not sure if that's just a Hawaii thing, but always making ready for our communities to be sustainable in their lands, to make sure that we're prepared for the things that we know will happen. There are a lot of natural, people would say, disasters that happen in Hawaii, hurricanes, tidal waves, volcanic eruptions. So the climate is constantly changing here on a micro scale. And then there's the macro that we also are being more cognizant about and advocating for more food to be grown in Hawaii, reducing the amount of waste we have going around. But I think majorly for me, it's being positive in a conversation that can be very negative and very dragging down. In my experience, in the profession that I'm in, focusing on what we want and advocating for what we want. And I think a good example is when I was doing my drought postdoc, I went around with this group that would ask managers, what happens when drought occurs? Like what how does it impact? Like what are the negative impacts of drought in your land? And I would follow up unsolicitedly, and I'd be like, what are the positive impacts of drought in your area? And they're like, oh, we can see archaeological sites, it's easier to clear, like we can do this, we can do that. And so instead of just focusing on the negative impacts from certain events, identify what are the positive things you can do while that time is there, because when that time passes, you will have a more difficult time doing those actual tasks. So being present in the moment, doing what you can, when you can, with what you have until you can't do it anymore, and pivot when a new situation comes up and look at what you can do in that situation over what you can't do in that situation. I think for me, the climate change conversation is very, very intense, especially after going to COP in Dubai this last year. Is there's a lot of requests, but we need technology to catch up to those requests. So what do we do until then? What are the tangible actions we can take on micro and macro levels to help us get to our goals as a larger community? And it all really starts with where we're at locally. How do we do this on a local scale? So we need to take care of us before we can take care of them. And if we're taking care of us, then we can take care of more people.
Present, do what you can when you can. Pivot. Hold on, 'cause I was writing that. Pivot when there's an opportunity to do it, and look at what you can do versus looking at what you can't do. If I I'm 45. If I would have had this 40 years ago, I wonder where my life would be. If I probably would have had this 5 years ago, I wonder where my life would be, Doc. So I really appreciate you just sharing this with us. And I just want to also ask you, we always want to know, do you have any questions of us? I mean, I know that we were technically questioning and interviewing you, but we also want to make sure that we show that courtesy. And if there's anything that you'd like to ask of us, or maybe of these two, yeah.
Why are you the Heartwood Podcast?
Well, years ago, I used to work at NC State before I came to Yale, before I went to Yale, and I was the first diversity director on the campus at the time, and so it was a tough journey, and one of my colleagues, I can give his name because it was his idea. His name is Dr. Mark McGallis. He's from New York. He pulled me aside and he was like, Thomas, I noticed that you don't let yourself get discouraged, man. You've been at this for like 8 or 9 years. And he was a friend. So I told him, actually, that's a lie. I get discouraged all the time. I said, I get sick of being in this room with white people who don't want to listen to me. But yet it seems like the solutions me and my crew come up with is what they end up doing in the end. And, and he was like, oh, you kind of hide that pretty well. I think you should. And he gave me the idea. He said, well, about the part of the tree that, is dead and it doesn't decay or whatever. I was like, yeah, Heartwood, yeah. He said, well, why don't you do a play on words? And being that you're a forester and you're doing this work, but but it's like he said, you're struggling with it, but you're bringing us along with you. He said, why don't you do a platform and kind of explain that at some point? That was 2016. And then when I came to Yale, he told me, I'm giving you that idea. That's why I said his name. Okay, he gave me that idea. And then when I came to Yale, as the inaugural Assistant Dean of Community and Inclusion. It was one of the initiatives that Dean Burke, supported me and now us in. I said, I think that this is something that would be great for us to have these conversations at the intersections of whether it's DEI, whether it's multiple identities, whether it's the environment and forestry. And then, of course, with so many, like my wonderful, beautiful brothers here, you got people who are multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. So I was like, if we have a platform where people can talk about this, I think that'll make future potential students like us more, because they realize that we're having it. And that's how it started. And I'm just fortunate that it has continued on. And of course, having my two new brothers with me, they're the ones who always take it higher. I admit I'm the blessed one who gets to work with folks, because I've been here technically since the beginning, and they just keep enriching it and enriching me. And so they make me grow my heart as far as I'm concerned, but that's how it started.
Cool. That's awesome. I was thinking it was because of a tree, but I wasn't sure if that's what it was. And anything I've given you that's been of value, it doesn't matter if it didn't happen earlier, it happened now. And so this is the time for it to happen, and you can take it forward from here.
Thank you. Well, hey, Isaac, Bennett, do y'all have anything?
Not really a question or anything, but I just wanted to lift up what you were saying about finding joy in the work. And I remember, I think the first time I met you was at the Environmental Joy Conference, and I remember what you said about you won't work with people who you wouldn't party with. And I think that, like you were saying, like maybe people don't have it in that register, but I feel like since then I've been noticing people saying it in this way where it's like, if you don't have the right team behind you, like any project, as good as it might look, isn't gonna go very far. But I love the way that you put it in that way, because it's like, I think joy is such a crucial element of the work, and it's so easy when you're talking about things like climate change to get bogged down in that and to have it make your heart heavy. And so I just wanted to show appreciation for everything you said. But I think in the times that I've sort of talked with you or just heard you speak, I think that's contributed a lot to my perspective. So I just wanted to lift that up and thank you for it.
And then for me, it's been a deep appreciation to learn from everybody and hear from everything, or hear about everything. Yeah, I don't know. It's been like helpful emotionally, and then also for like my thesis I'm gonna write. Like I was writing some things down. I'm like, oh, this is great. I need to put this in there. And yeah, I'm just appreciative. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me and listening to my story and sharing it, and for your time.
Thank you. And everyone, I hope that, well, I know you've enjoyed this episode. Okay, trust that we have. Hearing stories can shift attitudes, and hearing stories can grow hearts and expand minds. We have been honored today to talk to Dr. Katie Kamelamela. I hope that you all take so many points from what she said. It's too many. I'm not going to, there's no need to repeat genius. Just hit rewind and listen again. But what we hope that you will do is, if you have any questions about it, you know that you can reach out to us here at the Heartwood Podcast. Still there at Yale University. I'm your co-host, Dr. Thomas Richard Easley, and I do consider myself to be the most fortunate person here, because I get to work with great people and learn and listen from great folks each time. So everyone take care. I'll just say go in grace, go in peace. Take and give care. How about that? Until the next time we talk to you on the Heartwood Podcast, Dr. Thomas Richard Easley, aka Hip Hop Forest, is signing off.